Welcome. Right in the heart of Jesus' ministry, Matthew chapter 19 gives us these foundational teachings that, frankly, challenge our worldly values head-on. Today, we're going to explore what this incredible chapter reveals about marriage, wealth, and the very nature of God's kingdom. And in doing so, we're going to uncover truths that are just as relevant for us today as they were 2,000 years ago.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. We'll follow the chapter's natural flow, organizing our study into 5 key sections. We'll start by setting the scene in Judea, then we'll dive deep into Jesus' teaching on marriage. After that, we'll look at who the kingdom truly belongs to. Then we'll confront the hard truth about self-salvation, and we'll finish up with the absolutely incredible hope of the renewal of all things.
So first up, our introduction. Jesus moves from Galilee into Judea, and this is not just a simple change of scenery. He's deliberately walking into the very epicenter of Jewish theological debate. Really, he's setting the stage for the profound and challenging encounters we're about to witness.
Now, what's so fascinating about this chapter is how it's structured around 3 core tensions, 3 big conflicts. First, you have God's perfect, original design clashing with the reality of human brokenness and hardness. Then, you see the kingdom's radical welcome set against the world's obsession with status. And finally, you witness this ultimate showdown between God's call on a person's life and the powerful, relentless grip of personal possessions. To really grasp what's happening here, we need to understand the context. This whole story unfolds during what theologians call the Age of Law. Everyone, including the disciples, is operating under the Mosaic covenant. But Jesus, well, his teachings are consistently pointing forward, looking ahead to a brand new era, the Age of Grace. This coming age would define a person's relationship with God, not by their ability to keep the law, but by their faith in the finished work of the Messiah.
All right, let's turn our attention now to the second section, the Creator's design for marriage. The first major encounter here concerns the sacred institution of marriage, and it kicks off, as so many of these encounters do, with a test.
The Pharisees approach with a question that is absolutely designed to trap Jesus. See, at the time, there was this huge debate going on between 2 rabbinic schools, the liberal school of Hillel, which permitted divorce for pretty much any reason, and the much more conservative school of Shammai. Let's be clear, they weren't seeking truth here. They were trying to force Jesus into a political corner, to make him alienate one powerful side or the other. And this is where you really see the difference in their approaches. The Pharisees, they were laser-focused on finding legal loopholes inside the law of Moses. But Jesus refuses to play their game. He completely elevates the conversation above their petty debate, and he takes them all the way back to the Creator's original purpose at the dawn of time. And here we have the Lord's profound conclusion. He quotes directly from Genesis, grounding marriage not as some human contract that you can easily dissolve, but as a divine act. He reveals that God himself is the one who forges 2 people into one flesh. So, to sever that bond is to try and undo the very work of God. Now, when the Pharisees push back, bringing up the law of Moses on divorce, Jesus introduces a key concept from what we call hamartiology. That's the doctrine of sin. He explains that Moses only permitted divorce because of their hardness of heart. This is absolutely crucial to understand. The law wasn't God's ideal. It was a practical concession, a way to manage the damage of sin in a fallen world and protect the vulnerable. It was damage control, not a statement of divine approval. The disciples are so stunned by this incredibly high standard that they basically say, wow, if that's the case, maybe it's better not to marry at all. But Jesus uses this moment to elevate the idea of singleness. He frames celibacy for the kingdom not as a deficiency or a lesser path, but as a divine gift. It's a special calling for focused, undivided devotion to God's work, a path modeled perfectly, of course, by Jesus himself. Let's move to our third section, where we examine who the kingdom belongs to. This brief but incredibly powerful scene reveals the kind of posture required to enter God's kingdom, and believe me, it's not what anyone expected.
The scene is simple enough. People are bringing their children to Jesus just to have him bless them. The disciples, probably thinking they're being helpful and protecting their master's valuable time from an interruption, try to shoo them away. But Jesus issues a sharp, firm corrective. And his statement is a radical reordering of all worldly values. The kingdom doesn't belong to the powerful, or the important, or the religiously accomplished. It belongs to those who come like these children.
So what is the profound lesson for us here? Well, it's not really about the innocence of children, but about their posture. A child comes with empty hands. They aren't boasting about their status or their achievements. They just come with a simple, dependent, receptive trust. And Jesus teaches that this very posture, This is the only doorway into the kingdom of heaven.
And now we come to our fourth section, and it is perhaps the most dramatic confrontation in the entire chapter, the impossibility of self-salvation. This famous encounter with a wealthy young man cuts right to the very heart of the human condition and to the core message of the gospel itself. So a young man comes up to Jesus with the ultimate question, but I want you to notice the framing of his query. What good thing must I do? See, his entire worldview is built on this faulty assumption that eternal life is an achievement, something that can be earned through enough moral effort on his part.
Jesus' response is just a masterful, surgical diagnosis of this man's soul. First, he points him away from his own perceived goodness to the unique, singular goodness of God. Then, he reviews the law, which the man proudly claims to have kept. And finally, Jesus goes right for the heart, making a demand that's specifically designed to expose the man's true treasure. The call to sell everything isn't some new law for everyone. It's a specific prescription to reveal the idol that truly ruled this one man's heart.
So once again, we see the doctrine of hamartology at play, but this time it's focused on the sin of idolatry. The man's deep sorrow when he walks away, that's the big reveal. It shows where his ultimate allegiance, his ruling love truly was. His possessions weren't just assets that he owned, they were chains that owned him. Because as Jesus taught, you cannot serve both God and money. After the man walks away, Jesus delivers this shocking image. Now, people have tried to soften it, inventing stories about a small gate in Jerusalem called the Eye of the Needle. But that really misses the point. Jesus' language is meant to be jarring. He is illustrating an absolute human impossibility. For those who are chained to their earthly treasures, saving themselves is as impossible as forcing a literal camel through the eye of a sewing needle.
The disciples are just completely stunned. You have to remember, in their culture, wealth was often seen as a sign of God's blessing. So if this righteous, wealthy man couldn't make it, what hope was there for anyone else? Their question, who then can be saved, just hangs in the air, filled with despair. They finally hit the wall of human effort.
And right here, this is the pivot upon which the entire gospel turns. Jesus looks right at them and delivers the most hopeful words imaginable. He agrees with them. From a human standpoint, salvation is impossible. But then he introduces a new reality, a reality where the total impossibility of man meets the absolute unlimited power of God.
This single verse is the heart of what we call soteriology, the doctrine of salvation. It teaches us that salvation can never, ever be earned by human striving. It is a work of God's grace and grace alone. It is this divine power that breaks the chains of our idolatry, whether that idol is money or status or even our own self-righteousness. God has to perform a miracle, giving us a new heart that is finally able to treasure Christ above everything else.
And that brings us now to our final section, the renewal of all things. Now that we've established that salvation is God's work from start to finish, Jesus turns to the incredible promises that are reserved for those who follow him. Peter, always the spokesman, asks a very honest, very practical question. Look, we've left everything to follow you, so what's in it for us? It's a relatable question, isn't it, for anyone who has sacrificed for Christ? And Jesus doesn't rebuke him. Instead, he gives him a direct and glorious answer.
Jesus' answer points to a future prophetic fulfillment. He speaks of the renewal of all things, or the palingenesia in the original Greek. Now, this isn't about heaven or our current church age. He is speaking of a future time of cosmic restoration, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne and establish his physical, messianic kingdom right here on earth.
What's so fascinating here is the specificity. Jesus promises the 12 apostles that they will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. This is a key verse for understanding the distinction between God's program for national Israel and his program for the church. You see, the church is a spiritual body drawn from all nations in this present age. But this verse shows us that God still has a future physical fulfillment of his specific promises to the nation of Israel in that coming kingdom.
Then Jesus broadens the promise to include all of his followers. He assures them that nothing given up for his sake is ever truly lost. It's an investment with an incredible hundredfold return. This is partly realized right now in the rich fellowship of God's family, but its ultimate fullness will be found in the inheritance of eternal life in the age to come.
And the Lord concludes this section with this great principle of reversal. It's both a warning and a comfort. It's a warning to those who are first in this world's eyes, the rich, the powerful, the self-righteous,
that God's economy is completely upside down from ours. Our status here means absolutely nothing there.
And so, as we conclude our study, we land right back on this central immovable truth. It really is the thesis of this entire chapter. Left to ourselves, salvation isn't just difficult, it is impossible. But where our ability ends, God's power begins. With God, all things truly are possible.
May this truth of God's powerful grace encourage your heart this week. And as you go, here's a thought to consider. What possession or status in your life might be the camel keeping you from fully and freely trusting in God's impossible grace? For more in-depth studies, you can visit the Grace and Knowledge series blog at woody-brohm.online.